Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're digging into something that really touches a lot of bases. Local news, emergency alerts, even the shows our kids watch. We are talking about the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or maybe what's become of it. Okay, let's unpack this. We're taking an urgent deep dive into the CPB, this entity that's been, well, foundational to American public media for more than 50 years. We got articles, research, our notes. The plan is to trace its history, its mission, the big challenges it's faced, and crucially, what happens now, especially with these really recent massive changes.
Right. And the goal for you listening is to get past just what happened. We want you to understand why it matters for you, for how information works or doesn't work in the U.S. We're aiming to get to the heart of this pretty complex story, connect the dots so you really get a clear picture without feeling, buried in the details.
It's about seeing the importance of something maybe we took for granted. So to really get the significance, we need to go back. Back to 1967, the Public Broadcasting Act. Think about the time leaders like Lyndon B. Johnson were talking about media needing to enrich man's spirit, seeing broadcasting as more than just commerce. So this act creates the CPB, a private nonprofit, and its mission. Pretty noble stuff. Universal access to non-commercial, high-quality educational cultural content. It almost sounds idealistic.
It does. And the structure they chose, that's key. See, before CPB, the FCC had rules, like the Fairness Doctrine of 49 requiring different viewpoints. And by 1960, they even listed like 14 types of public interest programming.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. They were rarely enforced. So CPB was designed specifically to fill that gap, provide structure funding, and this is important, try to insulate it from political interference, which becomes pretty ironic later on.
And right out of that vision, we get the big names. PBS, the public broadcasting service that starts 69-70, and then National Public Radio, NPR, in 1970. Both born directly from CPB's mission to serve you with stuff commercial channels often skipped. I mean, the early impact was huge. PBS broadcasting the Watergate hearings, remember? Gavel to gavel, prime time. That really put them on the map.
And it wasn't just a one-off. Fast forward to 2011, an FCC report noted NPR actually had more international bureaus, more foreign correspondents than the big commercial networks. And think about kids' educational shows. Who was making most of them? Public television, Sesame Street, Arthur. These weren't just cartoons. They were huge for learning.
Oh, I remember fighting with my siblings over Arthur. Definitely a part of growing up. And zooming out, it shows that unique value, right? Local stuff, educational stuff that commercial media might ignore because, well, it's not always the most profitable.
Precisely. And this isn't just nostalgia. A 2023 GAO report, the Government Accountability Office, they flagged local public interest journalism as being at risk of market failure. They called it a public good, vulnerable to free riding. Basically, everyone benefits from good, local news-informed voters holding officials accountable, but it's hard to get individuals to pay the full cost, so it can just vanish.
Yeah.
CPB was meant to guard against that exact problem, like essential infrastructure.
Okay, so we have the history of the vision, but how was this whole thing paid for? Let's follow the money, because the funding is absolutely central to, well, everything that happened next. CPB was the main channel for federal money, right? Distributing funds Congress approved to all these independent stations and producers.
Yeah, and the numbers are interesting. For fiscal year 2024, about 10.6% of public TV revenue and 6.0% of public radio revenue came from these CPB community service grants. But here's the kicker. For a lot of local stations, especially in rural areas or serving tribal communities, those grants weren't just part of the budget. They were often the single biggest source of funding. We're talking like 8 to 10% for public radio on average, maybe around 15% for PBS and its member stations. So for many, that federal support was absolutely vital.
And the total federal commitment, when you break it down per person, was tiny, roughly $1.60 a person in this country per year.
It seems almost unbelievable, doesn't it? Such a small amount for Noviel, Antiques Roadshow, all things considered, all that local reporting.
It really puts it in perspective, and just to clarify how it worked, CPB gave grants to local stations, but then those stations used some of that money to pay dues to PBS and NPR and to buy their programming. So it created this whole ecosystem, federal money flowing through local stations to support the national networks indirectly.
A decentralized system.
Exactly. Interconnected. Okay. So despite this relatively small federal share and this broad public service mission, public broadcasting always seemed to be under scrutiny. These accusations of political bias kept coming up, not new, right?
Not at all. It's a long-running theme. You had figures like Kenneth Tomlinson, CPB chair back in 2003 to 2005. He went ahead and commissioned a study on supposed liberal bias in PBS's NNW with Bill Moyers, appointed conservative ombudsman. He ended up resigning after the Inspector General's report called his actions out. And more recently, critics, often from the right side of the political spectrum, kept arguing public media leans left. They'd point to specific shows or how issues were covered, things like Hunter Biden's laptop, COVID origins, LGBTQ plus rights.
So that's the criticism. What about the defense? How did public broadcasters answer that, and what did the public actually think?
Well, they consistently point to their broad reach. Sesame Street, Arthur for Kids, Antiques Roadshow for culture fans, plus their role in rural areas, underserved communities that other media often ignore. NPR and PBS leaders always defended their journalism. NPR CEO Catherine Marr, she talked about new senior editing teams for a high-level review, actually funded by a CPB grant, ironically. And it's really important to remember the U.S. model is different from, say, state TV in Hungary or Poland. Here it's decentralized. Independent local stations make programming choices. That's a buffer against direct government control.
In the public trust numbers.
That's the really critical part. Polls consistently showed high trust. A July 2025 poll found 53% of likely voters trusted public media for news reported fully, accurately, and fairly. Compare that to only 35% for the media in general. And PBS, rated the #1 most trusted media brand for something like 19 years straight. So despite the noise, the public trust was and remained pretty solid.
Okay, so you have high public trust, structural safeguards, but then 2025 hits. And that simmering political pressure just boils over. It becomes this cascade of actions pushing CTB right to the edge. Walk us through how that happened.
Yeah, it unfolded fast. January 2025, FCC Chair Brendan Carr orders this investigation into PBS and NPR stations, looking at potential violations of rules about commercial ads and underwriting. Now, underwriting is usually just acknowledging support, not direct ads. But Carr explicitly linked this probe to the debate over federal funding. That was a clear signal. At the same time, the Trump administration tried to fire 3 CPB board members. CPB sued, arguing the president couldn't just do that. There was some legal back and forth, but it showed the pressure on the board itself.
And it went beyond just programming or board fights.
Well, yeah. March 2025, CPB actually sued FEMA, the Emergency Management Agency, because they had halted funds for the Next Generation Warning System. That's crucial for emergency alerts, especially in rural places. FEMA did release the funds a month later, but it just showed how wide-ranging the pressure points were. But the really big hit came May 1st, 2025. President Trump signs Executive Order 14290. The title says it all. Ending taxpayer subsidization of biased media.
Yeah.
It was sweeping. Told CPB and all federal agencies stop almost all funding to NPR and PBS. And it even barred local stations from using any federal grants to buy NPR PBS shows. Then the Department of Education jumped in, killing the Ready to Learn grant for 2020-2025. That funded kids' shows. Huge blow.
Wow. Just direct hits on all the financial lifelines. How did NPR and PBS fight back against that?
Well, they sued. NPR teamed up with 3 Colorado stations, PBS with Lakeland, PBS in Minnesota. Their lawsuits claimed textbook retaliation and viewpoint-based discrimination, basically saying the government is punishing us for our coverage because they don't like it politically. And they argued First Amendment violations that these actions were a direct attack on free speech. These were major constitutional challenges.
And all this led to a final legislative act that kind of sealed the deal.
Pretty much. President Trump asked for a rescission bill in early June. That's a way for Congress to cancel spending already approved. The target, clawing back funds, including CPB's appropriation. Now, NPR and PBS CEOs had already testified back in March defending themselves. But the legislative push moved fast. The House passed the bill, super narrow vote, 214-212 in June. Party lines. Then the Senate advanced it in July. Vice President J.D. Vance had to cast tie-breaking votes. After a bit more legislative process, President Trump signed the Rescissions Act into law on July 24, 2025.
And the immediate result of that law?
Stark and fast. August 1st, 2025, CPB announces massive layoffs effective September 30th. Just a skeleton crew left until January 2026 to handle remaining funds, royalties, essentially winding down operations. An institution built to protect public media was being dismantled.
So, boiling it all down, what does this actually mean for you, the listener? What's the impact now and going forward of these huge changes to the CPB?
Well, The predictions from many observers are pretty grim. They're talking catastrophic effects for some local stations, especially again in rural areas, places maybe struggling economically. Think Alaska, Wyoming, Idaho, parts of Texas. You can see news deserts expanding, places where reliable local journalism just dries up completely. Without that federal seed money, these communities might lose their main source of local news, affecting everything from knowing what your town council is doing to getting critical emergency info.
That's a worrying picture. Vital information just gone in some places. Is there any light, though? Any resilience? Can public broadcasting survive this somehow?
There are definitely signs of resilience. NPR and PBS say they're continuing, though they'll have to make cuts, adapt. And interestingly, some stations are reporting more donations from individuals and corporations. It seems like when it was threatened, some people stepped up, realizing what they might lose. So public broadcasting might continue, yeah, but maybe smaller scale, more reliant on state funding where it exists, or purely on local support. It definitely forces a different relationship between stations and their communities.
So, stepping back to the bigger picture, what does pulling apart the CPB tell us about where media is heading?
It throws up some really fundamental questions, doesn't it? About whether the federal government should fund things like non-commercial, educational, cultural programming, things often called a public good,
Mm-hmm.
especially now with endless media choices online, but local news really struggling financially. And that original CPB structure, there's oversight from Congress, it's transparency rules. That's basically gone now in the same way. The future might force public media to become, I don't know, more like a purely community-owned resource, more dependent on local support, maybe less protected from those political or commercial pressures the founders worried about. It's a massive shift.
So, we've traced this journey from that really ambitious idea back in the 60s, trying to enrich man's spirit through all the challenges, to today, with the CPB effectively winding down. It's a profound change for how we get information.
Yeah, and it leaves us with some big questions. As this landscape shifts so dramatically, how will communities ensure they still have access to diverse, non-commercial local information? And what does it mean long-term when an institution specifically set up to shield media from politics is dismantled? What does that signal for an informed public? What really stands out to you about this whole story, and what do you think the ripple effects will be?